In the summer of 1883, federal investigators arrived at a place the locals called the Garden of Eden, a Christian settlement tucked away in southwest Kansas that had been mysteriously deserted overnight. What they uncovered buried beneath its manicured flower beds would haunt them for years. 9 families had seemingly vanished without explanation over the course of 11 years. Their leaders had always claimed they'd left to pursue missionary work, but investigators found the truth buried in shallow mass graves, skeletal remains. Robbed of their identities and life savings, New Eden wasn't a sanctuary, it was a graveyard. Before we dive into the twisted story of Prophet Isaiah Richardson and his murderous family, a quick note: this channel isn't for everyone. It's for those willing to explore the darkest corners of American history. If that's you, hit subscribe and drop your location in the comments. We want to know where you're listening from, because what happened on that Kansas prairie will shake your understanding of trust, faith, and how far people will go to hide the truth. And tonight, we'll look at why the government tried to bury this story for good. The year was 1871. The Kansas frontier was still a mix of opportunity and danger. Dodge City sat about 60 miles southwest of chaotic cattle town, where gunshots were as common on Saturday night as church bells on Sunday morning. But 30 miles northeast, along a quiet bend in Crooked Creek, a very different kind of settlement was growing. New Eden Christian community stretched across nearly 2,000 acres of prime farmland. It looked nothing like the rough, hand-built homesteads common to the area. This place had well-crafted wooden buildings, a grand meeting hall with stained glass windows shipped in from Chicago, dormitories that could house dozens of families, fully equipped workshops, and at its center the prophet's house, an ornate 3-story Victorian mansion that stood out in the prairie wilderness. Prophet Isaiah Richardson arrived that spring with his wife, Elder Sarah, and their adult son, Joshua. Isaiah cut an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, and with piercing blue eyes that gave the impression he could see straight into your soul. He spoke with authority, a voice that could move people to tears or silence a room. Sarah, his wife, of 26 years, held a different kind of influence. She was observant, sharp, and ran the daily operations of the community with near-perfect precision. Their son Joshua combined his father's commanding presence with his mother's calculating mind. He became the community's enforcer and the face who greeted every new family stepping into their so-called promised land. The Richardsons preached a belief they called divine simplicity. It was a doctrine that encouraged giving up all worldly possessions to live in communal harmony for the glory of God. New Eden promised freedom from the dangers and hardships of frontier life. No more failed harvests, no more fear of attacks, no more starving winters. In return, families were asked to hand over everything they owned and follow the prophet's spiritual guidance. By the end of 1871, 14 families had joined. By the next year, that number had doubled. By 1874, New Eden reached a steady population of around 35 families, roughly 175 men, women, and children living in what looked like peaceful Christian unity. Each family brought money, livestock, tools, and most importantly, unquestioning belief in Prophet Isaiah. The community prospered. Gardens flourished even in tough weather. Their furniture and tools were in demand in far-off towns. Children went to school 6 days a week, learning not just academics, but music and art. Evening meals were held in the Great Hall, with Isaiah delivering sermons that struck deeply at people's hopes and fears. But there were rules newcomers discovered slowly. All letters to the outside world had to be approved by Elder Sarah. Visitors from outside were discouraged. They might bring temptations or doubts. And once a family gave their wealth to the community, leaving became nearly impossible. Isaiah would tell them God had shown him dark visions of what happened to those who turned away: failure, ruin, and eternal damnation. What no one outside the prophet's house saw were the private meetings held every night after dinner. Families who asked too many questions about money, decisions, or Isaiah's authority started to draw attention. And the garden's elder Sarah so lovingly tended would, in time, become silent tombs. The Richardson family hadn't come to Kansas to create a religious haven. They came to perfect a system that would make them rich, all while using religion as a shield. The first murder happened on a freezing February night in 1872, exactly 10 months after the Miller family arrived in New Eden. But to understand how it happened, we need to understand just how carefully the Richardsons had planned everything. Herman Miller had grown suspicious. His children were being taught mostly scripture and simple trades, not much that would prepare them for life outside New Eden. He'd contributed $400 and livestock to the community's treasury. Yet when he asked Elder Sarah if he could purchase coats for his children, she told him the community couldn't spare the money. That night, after dinner, Herman approached Isaiah in the Great Hall. "Brother Isaiah," he said, clearly frustrated, "I've been thinking about our contribution for $100 plus livestock and tools, and now I'm being told we can't afford coats for our kids." Isaiah's response was calm on the surface, but Joshua, watching from a distance, could see the cold anger in his father's eyes. Isaiah called for quiet. "Brother Herman," he said, "it's clear the devil has been whispering in your ear. Come to my house tonight after prayer. We'll seek divine clarity together." At 10 p.m., Herman walked through the snow to the prophet's house. Joshua met him at the door and led him to the study, a cozy room lined with religious books and warmed by the fireplace. Isaiah spoke softly, easing Herman's concerns. "God has revealed a special purpose for your family," he said, "a mission that will bring glory to his name." But before Herman could respond, he noticed Joshua standing behind him. Something about his posture was off. As Herman turned, Joshua's hands closed around his throat. The struggle didn't last long. Herman was strong, but not prepared for Joshua's practiced violence. Within minutes, he was dead. The family had rehearsed every step. No blood, no mess, no visible wounds. As Joshua buried Herman in a prepared pit behind the prophet's house, Isaiah and Sarah went to the Miller's quarters. They gently woke Ruth Miller and told her that Herman had died suddenly of a heart attack. 3 days later, the Miller family had supposedly left for California. Isaiah explained that Ruth had received a vision to spread the gospel among gold miners. Joshua had escorted them to Dodge City, he said, but Ruth and her 4 children never left New Eden. That morning, they were given poisoned coffee by Elder Sarah, administered with the same care she used in every chore. Their bodies joined Herman's in the garden. By sunrise, their belongings had been sorted and stored. Valuable items were sold in towns far away. Their life savings were absorbed into the Richardson family's growing wealth, and their burial site, it became Elder Sarah's new memorial garden, a serene patch of flowers where residents could remember departed souls and pray for the missionaries they thought had gone west. The rest of the community mourned the Millers' departure and prayed for their mission work. They didn't realize they were praying over their graves. What followed set a pattern that repeated itself. For the next 10 years, after each disappearance, the community would enter a period of mourning. Prophet Isaiah's sermons would focus on sacrifice and spiritual calling. Families would draw closer in grief, unaware that the same fate might be waiting for them. And all the while, the Richardsons continued to grow wealthier, more confident, and more dangerous. Was met with an unusually harsh response. Prophet Isaiah rebuked Elder Weber, accusing him of entertaining dangerous doubts and allowing his child to speak out of turn. It was the first time a respected member of the community had been publicly shamed for simply asking a question. This incident sent ripples through New Eden. For the first time, members began to quietly wonder if everything was truly as it seemed. Some families who had long ignored their private concerns now found themselves unable to shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The story of Timothy's innocent observation began to circulate in hushed conversations. The Richardson family's grip, once absolute, had started to slip. Then, in the summer of 1883, federal investigators finally arrived, responding to anonymous letters and a growing number of inquiries from concerned relatives outside the community. The Garden of Eden looked peaceful from the outside, but the investigators quickly noticed inconsistencies. The names of supposed missionaries didn't appear on any travel records. Financial documents didn't line up. And then they began to dig. What they uncovered beneath the carefully kept gardens shocked even the most hardened agents. Graves, dozens of them, carefully ranged and unmarked. Bodies that had been declared as sent off on divine missions were lying just beneath the flower beds of Elder Sarah's so-called memorial garden. The illusion shattered almost overnight. The Richardson family attempted to flee, but Joshua, still wounded from the Hoffman struggle, was captured just outside Dodge City. Elder Sarah was found hiding in a cellar beneath the prophet's house, surrounded by documents she hadn't had time to burn. Prophet Isaiah was discovered 2 days later, alone in a nearby ravine, having taken his own life. The trial that followed revealed the full scale of the deception. Financial records showed a stolen fortune nearing $100,000, along with land deeds, livestock, and personal effects from dozens of victims. Survivor testimonies painted a picture of a community held together not by faith, but by fear. What began as a promise of salvation on the Kansas prairie ended as one of the most coldly calculated series of murders in American religious history. The name New Eden was struck from maps, the land was sold off, the buildings torn down, and the story largely forgotten, buried as deeply as the bodies beneath the flowers. But the memory of what happened there still lingers, passed down in whispers, a reminder that blind faith, when placed in the wrong hands, can be a weapon, and that the most beautiful gardens can sometimes hide the darkest roots. Received explanations that felt more strained and inconsistent than ever. For the first time in over a decade, someone inside New Eden began to seriously question the official stories surrounding sudden deaths and unexplained departures. Elder Weber's growing doubts, combined with what his son Timothy had seen, created a level of internal risk the Richardson family had never dealt with before. Before we get into the shocking end of this disturbing story, take a moment. If this has kept you hooked so far, consider liking the video and sharing it with someone who enjoys dark, true tales. And if you haven't yet, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because things are about to unravel fast. The Richardson family was about to face something they had never anticipated to witness. They couldn't silence without risking their entire operation. The investigation that would eventually reveal their crimes didn't begin with the law. It started with a determined woman named Catherine Brennan McKenna, the older sister of Patrick Brennan, who was killed in 1878. Catherine lived in St. Louis, where her husband, Michael McKenna, worked as a federal customs inspector. Unlike most relatives of New Eden's victims, Catherine had both the means and government connections to look into what really happened to her brother. She had long been unsettled by the complete lack of communication from Patrick's family. After their supposed move to Colorado for missionary work in 1878, Patrick had always written regularly, even during his toughest times in Missouri. His total silence after joining New Eden didn't make sense, especially since he had 6 children, and Catherine knew he would have written about them. By spring 1882, Catherine persuaded Michael to start making formal inquiries. Michael reached out to federal Indian agents in Colorado, railway companies operating routes to mining towns, and Catholic missionary groups serving Irish immigrants in the region. The results were alarming. There was no sign of any Brennan family doing missionary work anywhere. That August, Catherine and Michael went to Kansas themselves. They didn't notify New Eden ahead of time. Instead, they arrived quietly, hoping to get a sense of the place without tipping off the leadership. Over 3 days, they observed New Eden from the hills using Michael's military field glasses. At first glance, the community looked organized and prosperous, but something felt off. The buildings were well-maintained and newly expanded, suggesting access to far more money than a remote religious community should have. The farming equipment was expensive, and the livestock was high quality, another sign that there was more wealth flowing through New Eden than anyone admitted. Even more telling was the behavior of the people. During evening services, which were visible through the meeting hall's windows, the members displayed an almost desperate enthusiasm, like they were performing for someone instead of worshiping freely. The children seemed unusually quiet and on-edge behavior Catherine recognized from families fleeing religious persecution back in Ireland. The real turning point came on their 3rd morning. They saw Elder Weber approach Prophet Isaiah, clearly agitated and accompanied by his son Timothy. The exchange looked tense, with Prophet Isaiah visibly rattled, a stark contrast to his usual confident posture. That evening, Catherine and Michael went directly to New Eden and requested to speak with the leadership about Patrick Brennan. Their arrival caused immediate disruption. It was clear the community wasn't used to surprise visitors, especially not ones asking questions. Prophet Isaiah met them in the meeting hall, flanked by Elders Sarah and Joshua. He responded smoothly at first, claiming Patrick's family was alive and well, doing missionary work among Irish miners in Colorado. He even produced letters allegedly written by Patrick describing the family's success. But Catherine had read enough of her brother's writing to know these letters were fake. The handwriting was close, but not quite right. The tone was too formal, too religious, and the locations mentioned in the letters didn't match any real mining areas in Colorado. She confronted Isaiah directly, saying, "These letters weren't written by my brother." Her calm but firm tone cut through the room. The confrontation shook the Richardson family's carefully built image. Catherine didn't respect Isaiah's religious authority, and Michael's federal credentials made them impossible to intimidate, and their clear intention to alert federal authorities meant the family couldn't simply make them disappear like they had done with others. Michael, using his training, began asking specific questions about land titles, property transfers, and tax records. Prophet Isaiah dodged them, claiming legal documents weren't needed for those who had left the world behind. That only deepened Michael's suspicions. As a federal official, he knew fraud when he saw it, and New Eden was beginning to look like a front for something far more sinister. But it was young Timothy Weber who brought the final piece to light. During the tense conversation, Timothy whispered something to his father. Elder Weber turned pale. Then he shared what his son had told him. Timothy had seen the Hoffman family being buried in Elder Sarah's garden. Even though they were supposedly sent back to Germany, that admission changed everything. Elder Weber began to re-examine the garden and noticed irregularities in the soil and strange flower arrangements, suggesting that multiple bodies had been buried over the years. That night, Catherine and Michael left New Eden quietly and returned to Dodge City. There, using Michael's credentials, they requested an official investigation. They brought with them Timothy's eyewitness account, Elder Weber's findings, and evidence of financial fraud. The Richardson family knew they were in trouble. For the first time, they were facing a real investigation by people with the power to uncover everything. On September 10, 1882, Deputy U.S. Marshal James Crawford arrived in New Eden with warrants to investigate. He was joined by a federal land inspector, a territorial attorney, and 2 local deputies for the Richardson family. It was the beginning of the end. Despite weeks of preparing, coaching the community, hiding documents, and destroying evidence, the Richardsons made one critical mistake. They had kept detailed records of their victims' belongings, convinced these logs would make their crimes look like legitimate donations. The hidden vault beneath Prophet Isaiah's house was discovered quickly. Inside, investigators found items from 9 families, photographs, personal letters, wedding rings, children's toys, and most incriminating of all, official documents proving those families never left New Eden. But the most damning evidence was still in Elder Sarah's garden. Guided by Timothy's statement, investigators began digging and found a carefully organized graveyard. The remains of 47 people, laid out in family groups, with personal items buried beside them. The arrests came quickly. Prophet Isaiah, Elder Sarah, and Joshua Richardson were all taken into custody and charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, theft, and conspiracy. Survivors gave harrowing testimonies of how they'd been manipulated into believing every departure was a divine mission. The Richardson trial became one of the most notorious criminal cases in Kansas history. Newspapers covered every moment, and Congress even debated new laws to prevent this kind of abuse. Prosecutors laid out their case in 3 parts: the physical evidence from the graves, the financial records from the vault, and testimony from survivors who had lived under the Richardson family's control. Autopsies revealed that men had died from blunt force or strangulation. Women and children had been poisoned, many with water hemlock, a plant Elder Sarah secretly grew. The financial records showed that over 11 years, the family had amassed over $150, worth millions today. Elder Weber and his son Timothy provided crucial testimony. Weber spoke emotionally about the years of silence and misplaced trust. "We believed Prophet Isaiah spoke for God," he said, "and we let that belief blind us." The defense tried to argue religious insanity, but the evidence of long-term planning and deliberate deceit crushed that claim. Even Prophet Isaiah's testimony, where he insisted that God had told him who should die, only confirmed how dangerous he truly was. The jury didn't need long. All three Richardson family members were found guilty and sentenced to death. They were hanged on November 15, 1882, exactly 9 years after the murder of Thomas Hartwell. Nearly 1,500 people came to witness the execution. Even at the gallows, Prophet Isaiah insisted he was acting under divine orders. In the aftermath, the federal government introduced new rules for isolated religious communities, including regular inspections and stricter financial reporting. The Richardson family's stolen assets were sold, and the funds were used to help survivors rebuild their lives. Many of those survivors needed long-term care for trauma, what we now know as PTSD. Catherine McKenna became an advocate for federal oversight of religious groups, helping push for stronger protections for people in remote settlements. New Eden was abandoned, the buildings decayed, and the land was left untouched. Some locals said it was cursed. Nothing was ever built there again. Today, historians consider New Eden one of the most disturbing examples of organized crime hidden under the cover of religion. The case showed how easily belief can be twisted, how isolation and trust can be used as tools of control. The families who died weren't naive. They were hopeful, seeking a better life, but their trust was used against them by those who understood how to manipulate their faith and their fear. 9 families: the Millers, Hartwells, Kowalskis, Petersons, Brennans, Hoffmans, Schmidts, Caldwells, and one lost to history, were victims of a calculated betrayal carried out in the name of God. This story reminds us that the worst crimes don't always come from strangers in the dark. Sometimes they're committed by people who claim to lead us into the light. What do you think? Was everything really uncovered? Or were there more families whose fates were never connected to New Eden? Leave a comment below, and if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe, tap the bell icon, and share it with someone who's into hidden history and chilling mysteries. Sometimes the truth is darker than any fiction. See you in the next video.